Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Whole bunch of people sent me this story, and this is one of the strangest and saddest stories I've had in a long time on this show. From CNN, widely reported, a California woman died at the hospital. Her family, unaware, searched for her for over a year. And it kind of looks like the hospital misplaced her. They simply put her someplace after she passed away and kind of forgot about her. And it's just unimaginable. Sherry Mossberg wrote this for CNN. Jesse Peterson suffered a diabetic episode and was taken to a hospital in Sacramento. That was April 6th, 2023. The woman spoke with her mother on the phone 2 days later and asked to be picked up from the hospital. Mom, I'm ready to come home. Come get me. So that phone call was the last time her family heard from her. So the mother called the hospital 3 days later, only to be told there's no one here by that name. She insisted, and she was told that her daughter had left the hospital against the advice of her doctors. So, hey, the doctors wanted her to stay, but she wouldn't stay. And we can't keep her. So she left. Sorry. So the family began searching for her. They filed a missing persons report. They reached out to the community. They posted flyers with her photo throughout the city and even got her name added to the U.S. Department of Justice website of missing persons. And then more than a year after her disappearance, a detective with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office gave them the news they dreaded. He called them and said, there's a death certificate for your daughter. She's passed away. So her sister went to the coroner's office, but was told her remains were not there. They said, contact the hospital. They've got them. So the mother called the hospital, and they said, well, we'll call you back. And they didn't call back. But a mortuary later contacted them and said the daughter's body had been found at one of the hospital's off-site cold storage facilities. And her body was too decomposed for an autopsy. As it turned out, she had died within 2 hours of her last phone call to her mother. So she calls her mom and says, I'm going to need you to come get me. Just 2 hours later, she passes away, and the hospital somehow puts her body into cold storage, and the paperwork doesn't match up because when someone calls the hospital looking for her, they go, she left against doctor's advice, she's not here. And that's not what happened. So her fate has been spelled out now in a lawsuit filed against the hospital. In the suit, her family said the hospital never notified them of the death and had misplaced her body. Now, the weird thing about this is if somebody dies in the hospital, that's not a lawsuit necessarily because people die in hospitals all the time. The fact of the matter is that she died in the hospital, and then when someone called looking for her, they said, oh, she's not here, when she was. And I understand hospitals are big organizations, and they probably routinely have mix-ups all the time. But the death of someone is important, and there are laws regarding the documentation of someone's death, i.e. a death certificate. So if someone passes away in a medically attended situation, the attending physician is supposed to fill out a death certificate and say, yes, person in the hospital, they died, primary cause of death. If there's a secondary cause of death, they put that in, boom, boom, boom. Date and time of death, blah, 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 blah. They notify people, they file that with the county, et cetera, et cetera. There's a process for this. They do this all day long. But the lawsuit accuses the hospital of negligence, negligent handling of a corpse, negligent infliction of emotional distress, and violating California Health and Safety Code. Now, here's the thing. I've mentioned before recently intentional infliction of emotional distress. That's where somebody does something so outrageous where they're trying to cause someone harm, just emotional harm, that you can sue them for that in many states. Negligent infliction of emotional distress is where you, just through your negligence, do something that is so far out there that it causes emotional distress to the victims. And here, they're saying the hospital didn't do this on purpose. But it doesn't matter. What they did is so over the top. So if these allegations are true, I see a great case for negligent infliction of emotional distress. Now, the hospital said we extend our deepest sympathies, but we were unable to comment on pending litigation. The woman who passed away was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 10 years old, according to her family's attorney. She'd been hospitalized for complications of that 20 times, including twice in the previous months before her death, and again for a final time on April 6, 2023. At times, she did battle with addiction and homelessness. She had issues. The day after her death, her body was taken to a nearby morgue. Then, on April 9th, the hospital transferred her body to a cold storage facility, and she was placed on a shelf and forgotten, according to the lawsuit. Her family was not notified that she'd passed, despite extensive previous contact between the hospital and her family, as well as the fact that the mother was listed as the next of kin. And that's the other thing I'm going to get to here, because a lot of people are going to be reading between the lines and go, wait, if she's got a history of homelessness and issues like that, maybe when she checked in, she didn't fill out the paperwork properly. Maybe they had no idea she had next of kin, because I suspect that happens also. People are brought in who don't have next of kin. And so then what happens? But here, we had people contacting the hospital going, where is she? I need to talk to her, and so on and so forth. And she called, and they say that the documentation lists the mother as next of kin. So it was April 24th, 2024, some 362 days after she died, a death certificate was issued. Here is the problem. If the death certificate had been issued back when she passed away, and then she got put in cold storage, I'd have a much easier time believing that it was an honest mistake where just these things can happen. Here, the death certificate was issued 362 days after she passed away. And why was there that delay? That's the question. So that document was signed by a doctor at the hospital. That person is not named as a defendant in this case. And just over a week later, it was a sheriff's office detective who told the family that she had passed away. Now, it is unclear what led to the delay in issuing the death certificate. California's Health and Safety Code states the attending physician must complete the information within 15 hours of a patient's death. And that's something any doctor would know. And so I've mentioned before, I wrote a book about the Italian Hall disaster where 73 people died when somebody yelled fire in a crowded building. There was no fire, and all those people died. I've spent a lot of time reviewing death certificates and studying what coroners did back then. Now, of course, that's a medical examiner who does that. But doctors can also sign death certificates. Medical examiners can too. And so I've read, I'm not making this up, hundreds of death certificates, studying this and other things I've studied where people passed away, and death certificates contain very important information. And over the years, the laws regarding them have changed, both who fills them out and how they get filed. But California law says a death certificate must be filled out in 15 hours. So whether or not they knew who she was, whether or not they knew she had a next of kin, whether or not anything, someone passes away on your watch, fill out that death certificate. You got 15 hours. So decomposition over the course of the year to her body while it was in storage would not allow for an open casket funeral or even for an autopsy. So they can't even double check why she passed away, because remember, she was on the phone telling her mom she needed a ride home. A couple hours later, she's passed away. How did that happen? And so the lawsuit points out that we don't even know if medical malpractice was involved here. It might not have been, but you don't know. So the lawsuit says because Jesse's death was not reported to family for a year after her death, an autopsy to determine whether medical malpractice played any role in her death was rendered impossible, according to the filing. So when they think of her now, they think of her on a shelf in a body bag instead of how she was, said the attorney. They don't really have the closure of knowing what the hell really happened. The attorney actually said, what the hell? So I have no problem. I was pointing that out. I didn't say it. He did. But I do want you to know there's also one other legal theory that some of the more clever members of my audience are going to latch onto. And there's a concept called spoliation of evidence. Spoliation of evidence. Some people mispronounce it, say spoliation, but it's S-P-O-L-I, spoliation, spoliation of evidence. And if you are involved in a legal situation and there's evidence and you could preserve the evidence to help people understand what happened, but instead you destroy the evidence or you allow the evidence to dissipate somehow when you could have prevented that. Sometimes in court, you can ask the judge for a ruling on this and say that you want to be able to tell the jury that there was this evidence, which is no longer there, and the reason it's no longer there is because the other side did something with it or failed to do something to preserve it. And they did that because the evidence would hurt them. And you can get a presumption and an instruction from the judge to the jury that says that. So you shall presume that the evidence would have hurt these people, otherwise they would have preserved it. Now, I'm not sure if they're making the argument here, but I can see this at least coming up as a discussion topic because her body is evidence. And in fact, it is the best evidence of what happened to her and how and why she died. The fact that her body was not preserved in any way, shape, or form, and it doesn't appear that an autopsy was done at any time prior to it getting to the point where they couldn't do one, does make you wonder. And somebody, and see, I have some people in my audience who are real paranoid. I got some real skeptics in my audience. I guarantee you that somebody has already typed, Steve, they did that because they didn't want someone to see her body because it would have been evidence of their malpractice. I guarantee you somebody already thought of that. I don't know. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? And so the crazy thing is, I understand that mistakes get made. People make mistakes. And any place you got people, you're going to have mistakes. Doctors make them, lawyers make them, accountants make them, barbers make them. Everybody makes mistakes. The question always is, though, what do you do when you discover you've made a mistake? But also the larger of the mistakes. How do they get made? And so it is a problem in almost any field that if you do it long enough, you start losing track of the human portion of it. And what I'm getting at here is, if all you do all day long is treat people who come in who are injured and then they leave, more people come in who are injured and they leave, pretty soon it probably becomes a blur. How many people did you help yesterday? 30, 40, 50, I don't know. You could ask a doctor, right? And so you understand that if I said, how many people you treated yesterday? He's 29. If the number actually was 30, what happened to that one you forgot about, the one you missed? And so that very well could be what happened here. There's just so much happening at that hospital that one slips through the cracks. And it's a mistake, but it's probably a mistake by more than one person because a doctor needs to sign the death certificate. And you'd think the moment they move the body from the hospital to storage that something should be done to indicate that, hey, we had a patient and now we've got somebody in storage. And the change of their status should be documented somehow, right? And so, inventory problems at stores, things disappear all the time. Things walk out the front door that are being paid for. But a whole human body at a hospital, it seems like that should be not so easy to lose track of. So it's a crazy story. I'm sure we'll hear what happens somewhere down the road if it goes to trial. If not, and it settles, we might not hear about it. We'll see. But CNN and Sherry Mossberg wrote that. But a lot of people sent it. Thanks a lot. A California woman died at the hospital. Her family was unaware and searched for her for over a year. And meanwhile, the hospital had her in storage the entire time. Questions or comments, put them below this. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Total absence of humor renders life impossible.